Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. Hospital nurse wouldn't help feed me, paralyzed, brain damaged and unable to move my body * life. After spinal cord injury and brain injury warning. This story is very graphic, so be warned. Some of this is difficult for me to write, so please be kind. I've written the full story in another post. This is something that happened to me while I was in rehabilitation after I suffered a spinal cord injury and suffered a severe traumatic brain injury on New Year's Eve 2007. I was 17. Long story short, I fell off a roof when I was intoxicated. I lived around the corner from the pub, which is where I was drinking, until I was kicked out when they found out I was underage. I damaged my C4 to 5 spinal vertebrae. Incomplete. Broke my neck, back, both legs, tailbone, sternum, wrist and nose. As I fell, I hit the back of my head, which split my skull and damaged my brain. I don't want to go into detail, but the only thing that stopped my brain from falling out of my skull was someone holding my head together while they waited for the ambulance. I fell outside the pub. Aaron, if you're reading this, thank you. You saved my life. I damaged the right side of the temporal lobe of my brain, which affects memory, reading and general thought process. I also damaged the optic nerve in my brain, which made the outside half of my right eye partially blind. I also have a lazy eye. My heart stopped beating, which damaged my brain further, but because I was intoxicated I was able to be revived when the ambulance arrived. I was taken to the hospital and was airlifted to another hospital in Sydney to be placed under an induced coma. I suffered a subdural hematoma, bleeding and swelling in the brain, and my skull had to be drilled to relieve the pressure in my brain. My parents were given the option to turn off my life support, saying the best-case scenario if I were to wake up would be me severely brain damaged and paralyzed from the neck down. My mother said yes, but my dad said no, having faith that I would pull through, and he was right. I have no memory of being in a ICU. 5 weeks. The next few months were a blur as I slowly regained the ability to speak, communicate, understand, know my family members' names, read, write, smile. My facial muscles were damaged. Swallow, feed myself and breathe for myself. For a few months I couldn't move my hands, arms, neck or shoulders, let alone my legs. My dad was with me the whole time and helped me through everything. I was at the ICU hospital for 5 weeks and was then taken to another hospital when I no longer needed the machines keeping me alive. And after a month at that hospital I had learned how to breathe on my own, so I was taken to a rehabilitation unit nearby. This is where the story starts. At this point I could move my hands and arms a little, as well as one toes. But I had no use of my hands or fingers and had no control of where I could move my hands. If my hand dropped to the side I couldn't lift it back up easily. At this point I was awake and mostly aware of where I was, and I knew who my dad was. I was taken to a small ward with 3 other patients with brain injuries, including a Korean man named David who forgot how to speak English and didn't know where he was. I still have nightmares about being in that ward. On the second day of being there I'd forgotten where I was and didn't know where my dad was. I could speak but not very audibly, and I didn't understand why the nurses wouldn't tell me where my dad was. I was alone, confused and scared in a place I had no memory of being before. Then came lunchtime. I didn't have enough dexterity in new hands to pick up or hold a knife or fork, but it didn't seem that the nurses knew this or even cared. as they sat all four of us in front of the TV with our food on trays in front of us and left. Their desk was on the other side or a locked glass door where they could see us but we couldn't see them. I tried to get their attention but I still couldn't raise my voice much or lift my arms very high. I was starving and had no choice but to try and feed myself. It was a really shitty thing that they did by leaving me there without helping, but my triumph was glorious, albeit slow and rather messy, as I attempted to use a knife and fork on my own for the first time in over 2 months. In my struggles I could hear yelling on the other side of the glass but it was muffled. It turns out it was my dad, who'd been at the ward since 8 a.m. trying to get in. After lunch the nurses let him in and he stayed with me for the rest of the day and until I went to sleep. The nurses tried to get him to leave, saying that visiting hours were between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. My dad made it his mission to get rid of this rule, and for the rest of my time in rehabilitation he was with me every day. Thanks, Dad. For the rest of my time in that unit I was taught how to move my hands and fingers. I can't count of how many times I got frustrated at the therapists for the things they got me to do. I didn't understand the reasons behind tying a piece of string or doing the same repetitive motion with my fingers. But once I moved my thumb for the first time, I knew why. I was in other hospitals until I came home a week before Christmas 2008. My experience was hard and it took many years for my brain to recover. I can now fully communicate with people and most people can't tell I'm brain damaged. I have full use of my right hand and partial use of my left hand and arm. I have trouble reading and understanding complicated things. Think of watching Game of Thrones on rewind when my brain gets too confused and overworked. My brain just switches off. I've learned different ways of doing things like remembering things and learning new things. And although my brain doesn't work the normal way, it works fine for me now. I'm an incomplete quadriplegic, but don't let the word quadriplegic fool you. I can move my upper body and I can move my legs, feet and toes. My left leg not as well. And although I can't walk and never will, I am happy. In 2016 I went tandem skydiving to prove to the doctors and to myself that I am capable of anything, if I put my mind to it. The day I was forced to feed myself has ended in me doing much more than I ever thought was possible. I am not disabled. I am able. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.